Yes, as you noted, the airspace is closed around Israel, not just Israel. Other countries in the Middle East are also taking that precaution, given how busy the airspace is with warplanes and missiles going back and forth. The Israelis have started opening up the skies, but only for select returning Israelis. There's some 100 to 150,000 of them abroad. So basically, as a workaround, I was sent back overland through Egypt, flown from London to Sharm el-Sheikh, which is a famous resort on the Red Sea in the Egyptian Sinai. It added a number of hours to the trip. Overall, a pleasant trip. There are a few hiccups there, but that's pretty much what we're seeing across the board. Overland travel through Egypt, through Jordan, back and forth by those who are unable or unwilling, perhaps, to take what limited air options there are right now.
Sounds pretty difficult and pretty tricky. Having gotten back home, I'm assuming it was pretty difficult to see some of what was around you, but tell us about what is life like in Jerusalem today?
Well, since you asked, I'll share with you. A couple hours ago, we actually had sirens across the country. There was a volley of some 30 missiles from Iran. They set off as a precaution the Israeli sirens everywhere, and I got to join my family in the communal bomb shelter, a place I hadn't experienced previously, along with a number of neighbors, some of whom I hadn't met previously. But that really has been the daily experience here across the country, certainly in my neighborhood and in my block, including in the early hours of the night when some of these attacks have taken place. Basically, a very sophisticated early alert system that gives you a few minutes to organize yourself, and then when the sirens sound, to tell you that the missiles are in course potentially to strike where you are. That gives you a few more seconds, a couple more minutes to find shelter in a bomb shelter. People aren't taking chances. They might have taken shelter at home previously. They're all going to these underground shelters provided by the municipality, by the country, because as we've seen, the destruction wrought by those missiles that have managed to penetrate Israel's air defenses has been substantial.
Dan, I'm wondering about, not just anecdotally, but what the numbers tell us about Israeli citizens who have been mobilized to serve in this specific conflict versus just the ongoing war in Gaza. Obviously, there's been a lot of disruption to the economy. As a result, we're Bloomberg. We focus on the numbers. We look at the economies a lot here and get an understanding of what the bigger impacts of these events can be. What can you tell us about just Israeli citizenry right now? Who has been called up to serve? What has been disrupted? Just give us an idea.
That's an excellent question. But it's worth remembering this Israeli-Iranian war is not just a war in its own right. It's actually the culmination, the cresting of a more than 2-month-old war that began with the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th, 2023. You'll recall that in the early days of that war, we're talking more than 20 months ago now, Israel enlisted some 300,000 reservists that were mobilized. That took a big chunk out of the economy. You literally saw shops shutting down, entire malls, not just as a precaution against rocket attacks, but simply because shops were short-staffed. Anyone between the age of 21, 35 had a very good chance of being in uniform at that point. Many people leaving their families behind, their careers, and that was very disruptive. As that war made progress, Gaza was largely overrun. Many of those soldiers were demobbed, allowed to return home. This war with Iran is mainly being fought by the Air Force, which you can assume is fully mobilized. We're talking 200 warplanes just in the first wave, dozens of warplanes every day in various places, and not just Iran. We've had airstrikes in Gaza today and in Lebanon, potentially patrols in Syria as well. I don't have the numbers for Air Force deployment, whether it's standing military or reservists. I know it's probably lower than the ground forces, which have been deployed in far smaller numbers. There are 4 divisions now active in Gaza. And of course, there's Home Front Command, which is basically a military version of a civil defense force. Its responsibility is to handle emergencies on the home front, dig people out of rubble, provide first aid and such.
Dan, U.S. President Donald Trump signaled he would give diplomacy a chance before deciding whether to intervene militarily in the war between Israel and Iran. How is that being received there?
Well, if you notice the mood music from Israeli statements since that announcement was made by the White House, there's a tendency among Israelis who've commented on this to perhaps try to persuade the president to decide in favor of military intervention, at least when it comes to bombing Fordow, the famous now underground, deep underground uranium enrichment site the Iranians have. It's so deep underground in a mountain that Israeli firepower may not be enough to reach it. It may be a job that could be left only to the American Air Force with the famous mother of all bombs, 30,000 pounds that would be dropped from a B-2. And I think the Israelis openly want that to happen. Failing that, they say they can manage the job alone. It's a difficult job, but they say they can manage it alone. The question is how long the Iranians can keep up their retaliatory missile attacks. It would appear those are tapering off. Today we had something in the order, as I said, of 30 missiles, whereas in the opening weekend, 5 days ago, it was an average of about 100 missiles on every 24-hour cycle. So that seems to be dropping off, the Israelis say, as a result of their preemptive attacks against launchers. I think we will know more at the end of this weekend, especially as the Iranians are apparently holding stopgap talks with European powers now in Geneva, perhaps to find a way back to diplomacy, which would satisfy Trump, indirectly satisfy Israel, and perhaps bring this story to a close.
Dan, you mentioned that if the U.S. does not get involved with the massive 30,000-pound bunker buster bomb, Israel could handle this itself. How would they do that? What's the reporting telling you?
Obviously, there's strict military secrecy. I don't know. But the Israelis insist, including skeptical ex-generals who say they've been briefed on this, that it is possible. The two things that come to mind are, A, simply sustained bombing at one side. It's worth remembering back in September, Israel killed the chief of Nasrallah, the chief of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. He was in a bunker underneath a residential building, by then largely vacated, something like 20 meters underground with a multi-story building above him. What the Israelis did was drop 54 bombs, bomb after bomb after bomb, basically deepening the crater until he was reached. In theory, the same thing could be done, but on a much larger scale, much more sustained. With Fordow, keep in mind the Israelis say they have complete dominance of the Iranian skies. So in theory, there'd be no problem with them going back and forth with their smaller airplanes, smaller delivery payloads, and simply do it for days and perhaps weeks until they crack that nut. The other possibility is a ground forces operation, commandos who would penetrate it and literally go floor to floor, destroying anything they come across, blowing up, engaging whatever personnel there are down there. There is a precedent also from last summer where Israel did this with an underground Hezbollah facility in Syria. That might serve as a tactful precedent.